It's hard to imagine that these lovely rolling farm fields were once the scene of high drama, fierce bloodshed, and the making of history. A major victory for the Jacobite army of Charles Edward Stuart on a cold January day in 1746. Now, there are exciting plans to bring this history alive and allow the public to see rare and remarkable material culture from it. Plans are underway for a new museum and visitor centre at the Battle of Falkirk, Muir.
Hi, my name's Roddy Tulloch. I'm one of the trustees of the Battle of Falkirk, Muir.
Hi, I'm Alison. I'm one of the trustees at the Battle of Falkirk Muir Visitor Centre.
I'm up at South Pentaskin Estate to the south of Falkirk Town Centre at the site where the museum to commemorate the Battle of Falkirk Muir is going to be built. The building is going to be a two-storey building running east to west with views north over the Ochil Hills. To the east of the building is going to be a viewing tower to allow visitors to gain an appreciation of the entire battlefield.
Few expected the Jacobites to win again. They were, after all, at the end of a long and arduous retreat from Derby. With London in their sights, Lord George Murray had persuaded the Jacobite High Command to turn back, and they endured a 300-mile march back through the north of England in grim December weather. Leaving an unwelcoming Glasgow, Prince Charles Edward once again led his army on foot, wearing Highland garb. But he was disguising the fact that he was gravely ill. Prince Charles Edward Stuart, grandson of James VII of Scotland, the Second of England, and direct descendant of a long line of Scottish kings, had successfully installed his court at Holyrood in Edinburgh, but the Jacobites had not been able to take the two most important military strongholds in Scotland, Stirling and Edinburgh castles. Without them, they could not hold Scotland against the forces of George II's British government, which would soon be returning from fighting the French on the continent. Many saw the Jacobites as facing nothing but defeat, but that didn't happen. The story of the Battle of Falkirk Muir is one of intrigue, clever deception, bigoted arrogance, and enormous bravery.
Battlefield landscapes are the connection points between contemporary audiences and the great events of our past.
Charles set up his quarters in Bannockburn, south of Stirling, the site of Robert the Bruce's legendary victory. Stirling Castle was commanded by Major General Blakeney, who pulled his troops into the garrison and left the town of Stirling virtually undefended. The town council quickly surrendered to the Jacobites.
Our streets would have been strewn with corpses.
The Georgian government appointed Lieutenant General Henry Hawley, Commander-in-Chief of Scotland. A professional soldier in the service of the Crown, Hawley was notorious for hanging and flogging men, often those serving under him. Arriving in Edinburgh in early January, he found a useful train of 3-pounder guns at Edinburgh Castle and set about transporting them for use on the field. Hearing of the Jacobite advance on Stirling Castle, Hawley prepared to come to Blakeney's aid.
The siege of Stirling is a farce, considering what a force will march against them.
Critical to the siege of Stirling Castle was the arrival at Montrose of a very nice gift from the French: heavy guns. The government failed to stop the progress of the French guns in a prolonged and dramatic conflict on the River Forth, but Hawley was not concerned. He stored a huge cache of supplies nearby at Linlithgow and awaited the arrival of the guns from Edinburgh and 1,000 Highland troops of the Argyll Militia, Loudon 64th and the Black Watch under Lieutenant Colonel John Campbell. He sent 4,000 men under Major General Huske towards Falkirk, and himself settled into a pleasant occupation of Lord Kilmarnock's fine Callendar House. The Jacobite army was growing in strength, with the arrival of Lord John Drummond, with the Irish Brigade and the Royal Ecossais, and Fraser's, Macpherson's, Farquharson's, MacGregor's and McKinnon's from Skye, and the regiments of Lords Lewis Gordon and Cromarty. Lord George Murray found the cache of Hawley's supplies at Linlithgow impossible to resist. He launched a quick expedition to grab them. Hawley sent troops to attack and pin them against the loch, but the local population was full of Jacobite sympathisers and let Murray know. As they made a quick exit loaded with supplies, Hawley was still unfazed.
There are now 7,000 men, but that's nothing. They're Scotch and only so many mouths to feed.
The Jacobite army found advantageous ground north of Torwood, formed a battle array and waited for Hawley to appear for 2 days. But Hawley did not budge. He was still awaiting the Whig Highlanders and the train of cannon, and he was enjoying Lady Kilmarnock's hospitality at Callendar House. The Jacobite High Command held a council of war, and Lord George Murray proposed a plan to move on Hawley in 2 columns. Lord George Murray's column takes the route around the hills above Falkirk for a surprise attack. Lord John Drummond's to take a direct route through Torwood to mislead the Hanoverian forces. The Prince readily agreed. Torwood was the place where Wallace had taken shelter, and the Bruce had prepared his army before Bannockburn, which was not lost on the Scots as they marched through. Conflicting sightings were reported all over of a Jacobite army on the move, but Hawley, now with his reinforcements and cannon, was still not concerned, and still unaware of a second Jacobite column approaching the heights.
The rebels soon disappeared again, so the soldiers were ordered back to camp, horses set to feed, and Captain Cunningham of Argyle's regiment went into Falkirk to shave.
In their hurry to secure the ground, the Jacobites abandoned their artillery. The wagon train carrying Hawley's guns from Edinburgh became stuck in a bog and never made it to the field. The weather began to turn, sleet and rain driving across the moors.
We had the cruelest hail and rain, but happily it was at our backs.
The Jacobite army moved into array. Once Hawley finally realised Drummond's column was not the main Jacobite force, and it was too late to get his infantry to the summit to meet them, he sent his aide-de-camp, Stuart Mackenzie, to order dragoons, 3 squadrons of Cobhams and 2 of Legionnaires in the lead, to draw fire from the Jacobite right flank before it could take full effect. But the Jacobite Highlanders held their fire until the dragoons came close enough for it to do real damage to the advancing horse.
The moving cloud of horse in full trot upon us down the summit, I doubted not but they would have ridden over us. The brave front line of the MacDonalds suffered the enemy to come 10 or 12 paces of them without firing, then sent their benediction upon them in rapid and impetuous torrent.
Rushed upon the Highlanders at a hard trot, breaking their ranks and throwing down everything before them and trampling the Highlanders under the foot of their horses. Highlanders, stretched on the ground, thrust their dirks into the horses, seized the riders, dragged them down and stabbed them with their dirks.
Some of the dragoons broke through and engaged the Lowlanders in the second line in a fierce melee, but with the help of the Athol Brigade, the government horse were finally repulsed, and breaking to their right, went on a gauntlet ride in front of the Jacobite front lines. The disastrous engagement of the frontline dragoons sent Hamilton's 14th into flight with such momentum they tangled with a group of civilian spectators. Clondalkin and the MacGregor's blood was up, and ignoring Murray's orders, they pursued the retreating dragoons and the government infantry toward the Glasgow Volunteer Regiment, who began to open fire as their commander, the Earl of Hume, fled the field. The main body of Hawley's infantry was now in formation. Appalled by the sight of fleeing cavalry, they now faced the full impact of a Highland charge which carried away 4 first-line government regiments. A ravine made its way through the battle array which, for a while, protected the government right from a Highland charge. They were saved by reinforcement of Cholmondeley and Wolfe, who then greatly outnumbered the Jacobite forces on the north. On O'Sullivan's advice, the Jacobite northern flank, led by Lochiel and the Camerons, once again held their fire until the last possible moment, then fired and charged.
This was perhaps one of the boldest and finest actions that any troops could be capable of.
Cholmondeley and Wolfe reorganised the government regiments into a hollow square formation.
Cursed hollow square came up,
virtually unassailable by sword-bearing Jacobites, who fired and left behind their long guns,
took out our left wing by flanking them and obliged them to retire in disorder.
Until Charles was alerted by O'Sullivan.
His Royal Highness, on seeing this, brought up the few regular troops he had, 600 or 700 men and a body of horse.
Poet Duncan Ban MacIntyre was fighting on the field with Hawley's army and described how Charles and his troops had
driven like sheep before a dog.
At the end, the Jacobites held the north as well.
The enemy's horse went off as fast as they could and left us masters of the field.
And the little ravine was piled high with bodies.
These stones are known as Charlie Stones and are in the location where Charles Edward Stuart commanded his army.
Some of the weapons that are going to be exhibited in the museum is very exciting. These weapons were all used during the battle 270 years ago. The ones on the right here are Jacobite weapons, the ones on the left were used by the government army.
The Prince and Mary agree that the Jacobites should occupy Falkirk, even though there was a risk from enemy ambush and snipers.
Tonight, we shall lie in Falkirk or paradise.
As with all 18th century battles, the dead were quickly stripped by battlefield scavengers and their bodies placed in pit graves.
This area is known locally as the site of the English graves, which indicates that this is where the dead from the battle are buried. In December 2017, the Trust commissioned a couple of surveys to be done to see what lies below the grass. The results indicate that there's a 7-metre pit cut in the ground.
If you take a short walk up from the top of the ravine, you'll come across this monument, which was built in the 1920s to commemorate the battle.
Hawley wasted no time in retribution for those who had failed or deserted, and his hangman went to work in Edinburgh. Hawley himself escaped the fate of Cope and was sent congratulations from the Duke of Cumberland.
The king being entirely satisfied with your conduct on that disagreeable occasion.
Even without securing Stirling Castle, Lord George insisted that the Jacobites head north. The army marched to Aberdeen and to Inverness, there to meet many of the same combatants once again at Culloden and into history. We hope you'll support bringing this remarkable story to the public in a beautiful new museum and visitor centre where you can see fine artefacts which bring the people and history to life, explore the landscape and the events of the conflict, and find a warm welcome and a hot coffee in the cafe.